All right, we are going to go ahead and create our glossary for 3 key terms for the way that different plates can interact, different types of boundaries. And as you can see, our first type is called a divergent boundary. And so we're going to go ahead and get that as our first definition word. And our definition is when 2 tectonic plates move away from each other. So the root word of die is, you can think about a divide or to separate. So if that helps you to remember that, kind of into 2. So when 2 tectonic plates move away from each other. Your teacher can pause it and go ahead and create a picture of what a divergent boundary would look like in this space here. After you have drawn your version of a divergent boundary, which should look something like the fact that one is moving in this direction and one is moving in that direction. So the things that might form, and you guys can pause the video and as a class kind of come up with what would be some examples of formations that might form at a divergent boundary, and what would be some things that you would not see at a divergent boundary. So some things to think about for this is we might see, we actually can see new crust forming, we can see seafloor spreading, ocean trenches can actually be formed in this area. So these are anywhere we might see new crust because of those separation. A non-example is you're not going to see mountain ranges being formed here because these 2 plates are moving in opposite directions. Once you have that filled in, you're going to go ahead and we will do our next word, which is convergent boundary. So convergent boundary. And a convergent boundary is when 2 tectonic plates move toward each other. So think about co, it means together. And so these are 2 plate boundaries that are moving toward each other. So think about cohort or something like that. It just means together. Co is together. Co-curricular, together. And I would go ahead and have your teacher pause this, and we're going to go, you guys can, one, get a drawing of what a convergent boundary looks like, and what would be some examples that might form at this type of boundary, and what would be some non-examples that you might see at this boundary. So, if your teacher's paused it, hopefully you guys talked about, but a convergent, if they're moving toward each other, these are 2 plates that are moving toward each other. And there's really 2 types, and you can add this in. There's collision, which is the 2 plates are just simply moving toward and crashing into each other. So some examples that would form here are mountain ranges. You're going to see some earthquakes like down in California. And the other thing that is another type of convergent boundary is what's called a subduction zone. And the subduction is where one slides under the other. And this is where you might see volcanoes being formed. We'd also have earthquakes at this type of boundary, but in this case, a subduction is literally just one is sliding underneath the other. So both types of collision, one is just going underneath the other. A non-example is seafloor spreading because these are moving toward each other. This is not something that we would see there. All right. And our last word today is a transform boundary. And we can see a transform boundary is when 2 plates slide past one another horizontally. So as your teacher pauses it, go ahead, get the definition, do a drawing of a transform boundary, and then what might we see at a transform boundary and what would we not see at a transform boundary? So in a transform boundary, a good drawing would be, we have one plate moving in this direction and the other plate is sliding past it in the other direction. The example here is the San Andreas Fault in California is a classic example of a transform boundary. This is where we experience earthquakes. So as these two are sliding past, you can see as those boundaries, would be the earth shaking, we would see those earthquakes. And this would not be we would not be seeing mountain ranges in this area, just because those would be more of a convergent. There would be other different non-examples like C-form spreading as well. But a transform is they're moving in opposite directions, and again, classic where earthquakes happen.